Hello and welcome to today's episode on part 5 of Theories of Organization Structure. I am Dr. Arshia Hussain, PhD in Human Resource Management and teaching in the Department of Commerce and Business Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. In the last 4 episodes on the theories of organization structure, we have discussed the classical theories, the neoclassical theories and the mathematical approach and system approach from the modern theory. Today, we will discuss the remaining part of the modern theory, which is the contingency approach. We must review the earlier theories and approaches to management for a better understanding of the contingency approach to management. The assumptions of being universal by the management process approach were generally disapproved by most. The behavioral approach to management which followed was considered incomplete. A few quantitative techniques of the mathematical approach to management worked in certain situations but not in other situations. The quantitative approach was unable to solve behavioral problems, and the advocates of behavioral approach could not solve problems faced during operations that were adaptable to quantitative solutions. Several authors were of the belief that a theory based on systems could be a solution to this dilemma. However, a systems approach came short as well and was considered incomplete. This gave an opportunity to the rise of an approach which integrates all the different prominent approaches to management and is known as the contingency approach or the situational approach. The contingency approach is not really new. It was propagated by Paul Pigers and Charles Mayers as early as 1950 in the field of personnel management. However, it did not get much attention as far as an organizational approach to management is concerned. It was the work done by John Woodward during the 1950s that was looked upon as the beginning of the contingency approach to management and organization. There were other writers who made significant contributions to the contingency approach. The prominent ones among them are Tom Burns, G. M. Stoker, J. Lorsch, Paul Lawrence, and James Thompson. They studied the relationship that exists between the structure of the organization and the environment that the organization needs to operate in. We observe that the contingency approach integrates the external environment and makes an attempt to bridge the gap between the theory and the practice. This is done within the framework of the systems. We could say that contingency approach considers organization as an open system and a dynamic one too, which interacts with its environment on a continuous basis. The contingency approach is sometimes also referred to as the situational approach. However, there is a slight difference between the contingency approach and the situational approach. The contingency approach is pessimistic about the ability of a leader to change according to the situation. Therefore, it suggests that the right leader should be used for the right situation, whereas the situational approach is of the belief that leaders can and should change their style of leadership based on the situation. Now, we will see nature of the contingency approach. Contingency approach is a behavioral theory, and it suggests that there are many ways of designing organizational structures and none of them can be considered as the best way. The best way of organizing a company is dependent upon or contingent on the internal and external environment of the company. The contingency approach to the designing the organizational structure customizes the design of the company based on the sources of environmental uncertainties that company faces. The objective is to create an organizational structure which is capable of dealing with uncertainties in the environment in an effective and efficient manner. Earlier theories of management, like the theory of bureaucracy by Weber and the scientific management approach, sometimes fail. The reason for this is that they do not take into consideration the fact that management styles as well as organizational structures are both influenced by several aspects of the environment, which are the contingency factors. Therefore, a single organizational design can never be optimal for all organizations. Companies are different from each other and they all face their own set of specific environmental contingencies. These lead to different kinds of environmental uncertainties. Some contingencies that are important for organizations are: first one, technology, then different consumer interest groups, then suppliers and distributors, customers and competitors. Next is unions, then we have various government agencies. Now, Joan Woodward wrote in her report titled Management and Technology Problems of Progress Industry, published in the year 1958, that technologies directly determine certain characteristics of an organization. These are span of control, the centralization of authority, and the formalization of rules and procedures. She pointed out that when technical complexity was increased in an organization, the number of levels of authority in the hierarchy of management increased as well. However, the span of control of the supervisors decreased. Her most important contribution to organization theory was that the structure of an organization was contingent on the types of the production technologies that the organization employed. This became a cornerstone of contingency theory, and several authors built their theories around this primary idea. Authors of contingency theory like Paul R. Lawrence and J. W. Losch discovered that companies that operate in environments that are not very stable were able to operate more effectively if the structure of the organization was less formalized and more decentralized. Also, they were more effective if the organization relied more on mutual adjustments between different departments within the organization. Similarly, companies that operated in environments that were uncertain seemed to operate more effectively when they had a higher degree of differentiation between subtasks within the organization. They were more effective when the different units doing these subtasks were integrated with each other to a very large extent. Companies that operated in an environment that was more stable and more certain operated more effectively if the organization was more formalized and more centralized in their decision making. They functioned better if they relied less on mutual adjustments within different departments. Similarly, such companies do not need a higher degree of differentiation between subtasks within the organization. Amongst the most prominent authors of contingency theory were Tom Burns and G. M. Stocker. Their theory, mechanistic and organic systems, played an important role in shaping the contingency theory. They classified organizations in their current state as being either mechanistic or organic. They conducted research and the results were similar to the findings of Lawrence and Losch. When organizations operate in environments that are more stable, they are likely to display a more mechanistic organizational structure. When companies that operate in environments which are more dynamic and uncertain, they are likely to show an organizational structure that is more organic. The theory proposed by Burns and Stocker keeps in consideration the internal and external environment that already exist and affects the behavior of organizations and the possibilities that are in front of the organization. They suggest certain behavior for the organization and the action it could incorporate in its operations. They provide a comprehensive view of organizations and recommend several courses of action that are based on its internal and external environment. Fremont E. Cast and James E. Rosenweg wrote extensively in 1970s on organizations and management. They write that the contingency approach seeks to understand the interrelationships between the subsystems of an organization and also between the organization and its external and internal environment. The contingency approach also attempts to define the patterns of relationships of different variables. They went on to say that the objective of the contingency approach is to suggest organizational design and actions for managers that would be more appropriate for certain specific situations. There is consensus among writers of contingency approach that this approach to management is based upon the assumption that there are several ways to manage any problem faced by an organization and none of those ways could be considered the best way for managing all organizational problems. The application of the principles of management and its practices should be contingent upon the present and existing circumstances faced by the organization. Several tools of management including functional, behavior, quantitative and systems should be applied based on the situation. There are three major elements of the conceptual framework of the contingency approach to management. The first one is the environment. Second one is the principles, concepts and techniques of management, and the third one is the contingent relationship that exists between the two. The contingency approach insists that there is no single style of leadership that could be considered the best and would be appropriate for all situations. The effectiveness of every leadership style would vary when applied to different situations. It could be very effective in one situation and ineffective in another. An example of this is participative leadership, which would be more effective in an organization that engages professional employees and operates in an environment of high technology with an atmosphere that is not materialistic and enjoys free expression. Another example is an authoritarian leadership, which might be more effective in an organization that employs workers who are unskilled and work on routine tasks with an atmosphere that leans towards materialism and follows discipline and authority. Contributions of contingency approach. The contingency approach has made immense contribution towards management of organization. Contingency approach suggests that there is no single way of managing an organization that could be categorized as the best way and will be applicable to all situations that might arise. The best management approach is the one that can effectively deal with the specific situation during that point of time. Any two given situation could be vastly different from each other and a different approach would be required to manage each of them. The effectiveness of any technique that might be used is contingent on that specific situation. A situation could be complicated and have conditions that are specific to only that situation, and that is what determines the approach that will be effective and should therefore be applied. Contingency approach dismisses the concept of universality of management and it appears to be common sense. However, this approach is a lot more than just common sense. There is a need to recognize and analyze a management situation accurately, and this requires ability and skill. It is not possible to use the contingency approach without the ability to understand and appreciate the knowledge of management and the skills to analyze the situation. The management should be able to accommodate its approach based on the requirements of this specific situation. The policies of management and its practices must respond to the changes in its environment in order to be effective. The structure of the organization, the style of leadership, and the control system should all be designed based on the needs of the specific situation. In other words, management needs to be completely situational. Contingency approach is intended for action and provides direction towards applying the concepts of systems and the knowledge that has been acquired from other approaches of management. However, the approach that needs to be used or the style of management that needs to be followed depends completely upon the type of situation at hand and its specific complexities. Now, we will see review of contingency approach. Contingency approach provides guidelines to managers for them to be adaptive to different variables in their environment. This is the reason that it has also been called the common sense approach. It suggests managers to develop sensitivity towards different situations and select a practical way. When this approach is adopted, it can be useful in designing of effective organizations, formulation of strategies, establishing systems for communication and control, planning information systems, shaping different approaches for leadership and motivation, managing change, resolving conflict, and so on. This approach draws attention to the multivariate nature of organization, and it also spells out the way organizations operate in diverse conditions. It helps managers in designing structures that are relevant and suitable for different situations. When an organization operates in a stable environment, it can adopt a mechanistic structure which is characterized by a high degree of differentiation, by centralization of authority, hierarchical relationship that are rigid in nature, by rules and regulations, and so on. In case the organization operates in a dynamic environment, it can adopt an organization structure. This structure has different characteristics, like a decentralized process of decision making, a structure where there is open communication, a space for collaborative relationships, a scope for innovation in the process of making decisions, and so on. The advocates of contingency approach are of the opinion that managers must take environmental contingencies into consideration when they decide on which leadership style to adopt and what techniques to use. This approach disregards any preconceived notions that managers might have and liberates them from any precepts or rigid behavior. The principles of management and techniques need to be customized so that they can handle the situation and in an effective manner. Solutions that are ready-made and are meant to manage all situations are not acceptable. Contingency approach suggests that managers should be sensible and practical while managing situations and should approach every situation with an open mind. A superior approach. The contingency approach is considered an improvement over several other approaches, especially systems approach. Not only does it review the relationship that exists between subsystems within an organization, but it also examines the relationship between the organization and the environment that it operates in. It is considered that the contingency approach holds a lot of promise for the development of the theories of management and its practice in the future. The contingency approach manages to consolidate all other prominent approaches to management within its framework. This is not to say that the contingency approach does not have any limitations. There are serious limitations. First one, it does not acknowledge the influence that the concepts of management and its techniques have over the environment. And the next limitation is the literature that is available on the contingency approach is still not adequate. Now, we will see systems approach versus contingency approach. The systems approach emphasizes on the interdependencies as well as the interactions that exist among systems and subsystems. While the contingency approach goes to the next step and identifies the nature of those interdependencies, it also highlights the impact that the environment might have on organizational design and the style of management. The primary focus of the system approach is on the internal environment of the organization and its subsystems, while the primary focus of the contingency approach is on the external environment of the organization. The systems approach views all organization in the same manner. It does not take into consideration the size of the organization or its socio-cultural settings. On the other hand, the contingency approach looks at every organization differently and believes that each one of them needs to be studied as a unique establishment. The systems approach looks at the organization at a philosophical level, whereas the contingency approach follows an action-oriented approach. It is based on practical and realistic considerations. The systems approach just mentions that the organization interacts with its environment but does not dwell upon it, while the contingency approach considers the impact that the environment has on the organizational structure and the style of management as a major concern. The systems approach does not make any comments about the validity of the classical principles of management, whereas the contingency approach rejects the blind application of classical principles of management. Let's summarize what we have done in today's episode. The contingency approach is not really new. It was propagated by Paul Piggers and Charles Mayers as early as 1950 in the field of personnel management. However, it did not get much attention as far as the contingency approach is concerned. It was the work done by John Woodward during the 1950s that was looked upon as the beginning of the contingency approach to management and organization. There were other writers who made significant contributions to the contingency approach. The prominent ones among them are Tom Burns, G.M. Stocker, J. Lorsch, Paul Lawrence, and James Thompson. Nature of the contingency approach. Contingency approach is a behavioral theory and it suggests that there are many ways of designing organizational structures and none of them can be considered as the best way. The best way of organizing a company is dependent upon or contingent on the internal and external environment of the company. Earlier theories do not take into consideration the fact that management styles as well as organizational structures are both influenced by several aspects of the environment, which are the contingency factors. Therefore, a single organizational design can never be optimal for all organizations. There are three major elements of the conceptual framework of the contingency approach to management: the environment, the principles, concepts and techniques of management, and the contingent relationship that exist between the two. Contributions of contingency approach. Contingency approach suggests that there is no single way of managing an organization that could be categorized as the best way and will be applicable to all situations that might arise. The best management approach is the one that can effectively deal with the specific situation during that point of time. Contingency approach dismisses the concept of universality of management. The management should be able to accommodate its approach based on the requirements of the specific situation. Contingency approach is intended for action and provides direction towards applying the concepts of systems and the knowledge that has been acquired from other approaches of management. So that is all we have for today. Hope the session was informative. We will meet again in the next episode with a new topic. Till then, take care and good.